May 2008, the volcano in Chaiten, Chile, erupted. 10,000 people evacuated, homeless. A discussion on the 5 new survival priorities of tools, shelter, fire, water, and food. Let's look at them one at a time. Tools. Old knives are long enough as swords for hobbit people, he said. Sharp blades are good to have if shire folk go walking east, south, or far away into dark and dangers, said old Tom Bombadil. From the time man first walked this earth, his most useful tool has been a cutting tool, a knife. Once made from stone, and now of steel, the knife still remains as one of our most used of tools. In skilled hands, the knife can be a survival kit all in itself. It can serve to make shelter, to kill and prepare food, dig for water, construct a fire-making device, provide self-defense, and many more important uses. But there are several other very important and valuable tools to consider as well. Shelter. Here's a definition of shelter. Something beneath, behind, or within which a person, animal, or thing is protected from storms, missiles, adverse conditions, etc. Now that works for dictionary.com, but I want to broaden it out just a little. For survival purposes, shelter is an external barrier to heat, cold, wind, or wet that threaten the body's core temperature. It's also clothing worn on the body to preserve naturally generated body heat. It also can include an external source of heat, fire. In other words, shelter can be a sanctuary from the storm, be it a cave, a house, tent, or whatever, the clothing you wear, and a blazing campfire. For example, there are tarp shelters, nomadic shelters, tents and such, natural shelters, caves and overhangs, and debris shelters. Add a little fire to it and it kind of makes it feel like home. There are many different kinds of shelters that can be utilized for protection from the elements. Your house, as long as it's safe, is perhaps the very best shelter. An automobile can be effectively used as a shelter. Any building or structure that is intact can be sheltered in. Shelters can be constructed from debris using the construction forms of the lean-to, A-frame, or many other variations. Tarps can be configured as tents, teepees, and flies. Caves and overhangs form natural shelters. One thing to consider in shelter making is insulation. Insulation is basically materials used to create dead air space, which keeps heat in and cold out by restricting the passage of warmth and or cold. For example, you can increase the insulation properties of a bulky sweatshirt by crumbling up sheets of newspaper and loosely stuffing them inside. Clothing is your first defense against the elements. One very important thing to consider in clothing is the material it's made of. There are basically 3 kinds of materials for making clothes: plant, animal, and synthetic, or man-made. Each has its own characteristics and value as shelter. The thing to consider is the material's insulation properties, dry and wet. So which to choose? That depends on the climate. Clothing made from plant fibers usually lose all insulation properties when wet or damp. Therefore, they are most useful in hot, dry regions and can be downright dangerous in wet ones. Animal fibers have high insulation properties and retain them when wet or damp, but they tend to be heavy and sometimes a little itchy and scratchy. Man-made fibers can be manufactured to mimic the weight and insulation properties of both plant and animal fibers, and usually retain those properties when wet or damp. Synthetics are usually much lighter in weight with nearly the same insulation value. Now you need to think like a squirrel when it comes to shelter. He finds a hole in a tree, just the right size, makes it all cozy and comfy with grasses and fur, that's insulation, and then curls up with his bushy tail wrapped around his furry body. The fetal position is the most protective of body warmth. And then he snugly sleeps the winter away. What are his secrets? His shelter keeps him out of the elements, it's sized to his needs, and he makes use of insulation and his furry clothes. Fire. There is little shelter or defense here, but fire shall serve for both. Fire is our friend in the wilderness, said Aragorn. Fire is a vital element of survival. It serves us on several levels. The most obvious benefit of fire is providing warmth when it's cold, but it is also very useful for cooking food, purifying water, as a signaling device, and it keeps lions, tigers, and bears at bay. A less obvious, but perhaps most important purpose of fire is its ability to lift our spirits. Attitude is a critical player in a survival situation. Take, for example, a cold, drizzly night in the woods, darkness creeping all around, and you're all alone without a fire. How do you think you are feeling? How's your attitude? Now, get a little fire going and see how your attitude changes. Yes, fire is our friend. Now, a proper survival kit should have at least 3 different ways of creating a fire. If you'll remember, Samwise Gamgee sagely had flint and tinder tucked away in his pack. It's also smart to learn a little bit about how to build a proper fire. So let's talk a little bit about the basic elements of building a proper fire. The first thing you're going to need is tinder. Now, tinder is light, fluffy, easily flammable materials that will readily catch a spark or a coal, and you can blow it into flame at that point. The next thing you need is kindling. Kindling is little small splints of wood, small twigs, small sticks that can readily catch that flame and build it into a little larger fire. And then you need fuel. And fuel goes anywhere from larger splints of wood to logs. Water. "Let's have a drink at any rate," said Pippin. "I'm parched." He clambered up on a great tree root that wound down into the stream, and stooping drew up some water in his cupped hands. It was clear and cold, and he took many draughts. Water is the elixir of life. You know what it is, and you know what to do with it. The body needs a continual supply, and it needs to be pure and clean, free from bacteria, viruses, toxins, and chemicals. The most important thing to know about water is how to obtain it when the normal supply lines are gone. Secondly, you will need to know how to purify it, and thirdly, how to store it. Here are some possible sources of emergency water. The toilet tank. Now notice I said tank and not necessarily bowl. Now if you're really desperate, you could use the water in the bowl as long as you purify it. Water heaters are usually a source of 50 gallons or more of water. And the turned off garden hose. Water remains in the hose, and you can drain it out and use it. Tastes a little funny, maybe a little bit like plastic, but it's usable. And I suppose you could even consider the fish bowl. Food. I guess he's not a vegetarian. "There is food in the wild," said Strider, "berry, root, and herb, and I have some skill as a hunter at need. But gathering and catching food is long and weary work," says Aragorn. Even though you can miss many meals and still survive, a belly full of food is also an attitude builder. In addition, a tough survival situation usually requires the expenditure of energy. If that energy is not replaced with food, i.e. fuel, your body will not be as effective as it may need to be, and you will suffer. A catch-22 in this is addressed by Aragorn when he tells the hobbits that food gathering and catching is hard work, and hard work expends lots of energy. So a proper survival kit will include a lightweight, high-energy supply of at least 3 days' worth of edibles. Much consideration must be given to weight and portability in selecting food supplies for your kit. A 3-day supply will run out in, 3 days. So you may have need of staying away from your home for more time than that. You might have to get creative. It would be wise to learn about wild edibles, plant, animal, and otherwise, and how to harvest them. Develop skills in hunting and fishing. And knowing a little something about traps and snares is also very useful information to have. Learning how to prepare various animal foods for the pot will come in very handy. He took out his knife, cleaned and wetted it, and began to skin the rabbits. Are you ready to start learning about a proper survival kit? Let's go to part 3.